well, what are the basic aspects and elements of survival? You know, obviously we all know food, water, shelter. And I would add to that relationship, because we are social beings and we have big hearts, even if we try to pretend that we don't. Um, so there was this kind of natural intersection in where they were trying to lean towards and where I was realizing I needed to lean towards. And that's the origin story of the Dogbane Movement Hub, which um, you know, is about a year into development. So very, very in its infant stage, relative to what our ambitions are and what we'll learn in the process. But I think what the most essential thing to encapsulate what this project is it's something that is like, to any extent that we're doing agricultural production, that the way in which we evaluate that production is to the extent that it is connected to enabling of a conduit for organizing and regenerating community, regenerating social fabric, creating a degree of sovereignty that can enable us to make different choices and decisions than we currently are able to make. I think my next slide hits that point. Let me check. Oh no, it's just cool pictures. So let me pivot. I'll get back into my thoughts about it, but just so you know what we're talking about. This is, in these slides, you'll see what we've been doing, at least in an agricultural sense this year. The first one on the left is about 3/4 of an acre that we're growing, that are in production now. That's what it looked like in March of this year. The middle one is what it looks like in June. And then the third one is almost exactly a month later in July. And one of the things that I've been insistent on emphasizing in some of my interests is founded on the fact that seasons don't allow you to rush. Nature doesn't allow you to rush. You can't procrastinate and you can't rush the rhythm of the earth and ecology. So I think if we wait until we realize the conventional kind of food and crops that we rely upon to feed ourselves are no longer viable in our particular bioregion, we wait until the moment in which those crops are no longer viable, they can't be produced, we're way too late to do anything. There's no such thing as catching up when you're working with the pace of spring to summer to fall to winter, and the way in which we can only learn about crops by growing them, and they will not grow faster than you want them to. Alaric is kind of blowing my mind with the vertical agriculture. So I'll leave a strong asterisk to things I'm saying, because I think the innovations that they're confronting are really worthwhile in getting over some of those paradoxes. But for the most part, you know, a lot of my investment in this work has been to grow non-traditional crops, crops that are, in one sense, culturally relevant to the diasporas that make up America, the people of color that have their own foodways. But in a similar sense, originate from places in the global South. For example, I'll go back to those, but for example, in these slides, you'll see in the middle, we have Mocheya. I don't know where y'all are located, but this heat wave was OD. Like it was, that was extreme. You know, it's not just a hurricane or a fire, kind of the spectacular crises that happen in a moment and devastate a community, but 2 months of a heat wave is devastating. And it's devastating to farmers for their livelihood, but it's also devastating to our capacity to grow food that we expect some regularity of our seasons. So kale and lettuce and the things that we typically eat as our leafy greens. By June, basically they were done. I was able to harvest those crops from end of April to early June. So that's barely 4 weeks worth of food. And that's starting to become more of a consistent trend here in Virginia with our summers. So moheya in the center, that's a crop that comes from Egypt and Palestine. That's a leafy green that's actually more nutrient dense and grows in a place like Egypt. It can be planted in May and it will give you food until November. So this is just to give you a sense, like we need to start learning. But at the same time, I've grown, for example, callaloo, which is a Caribbean green. And in Virginia, we have a lot of flea beetles and they devastate that crop every year. And you wouldn't know until you are in the practice of growing, in the practice of year after year experimenting with what crops are adapted to our very particular bioregions. So that's one of the main core emphasis points of our project. Beyond that, these photos are a collage of different community events we've held or retreats we've held for people doing, organizing work from everywhere from student organizing to racial justice organizing. The photo on the right is a local group of service workers in the restaurant industry who are organizing to be able to contend for dignity and fairness in that sector, which, as we all know, is one of the worst as far as exploitation goes. So we are trying to utilize this spot as a space of autonomy as well. There's been a lot of student activism on campuses across the country in the last year, and it can be a little bit counterintuitive if you're organizing against an administration to host a 3-day kind of strategy retreat in one of the convergent spaces at the campus. So we want to create this space where people can, leave their own context, but be in a place in which they feel grounded, and in which they can also be exposed to the work of agrarian struggles, can be eating the food that we're growing, a quarter mile down the driveway, and I keep hesitating because it gets real woo-woo real quick when you start talking about land and how it has this power and impact on our souls and our energy. So I'm gonna save y'all that kind of aspect of it, but what I do know is people who have come here for the retreats, the land is a part of what comes up and the kind of conversations that can be had. And I think in general, we don't have spaces in which we're autonomous. We go to spaces where we have to pay for something in order to be there. We don't have a lot of familiarity of being anywhere in which we're able to be free. And I think that's a really important condition for us to be able to imagine freedom and liberation, which is ultimately what we're aiming towards. So experimentation around climate resilient crops and climate adapted crops being one pillar, the retreats and spaces of autonomy being another pillar. And then, as Daisy was talking about, we're piloting our own, I'm at, 14 minutes? Okay. We're piloting our own iteration of the movement incubation program. That'll actually be starting up next week. And Daisy covered a lot of what the intention of that program is, which is to bring people from different areas of struggle that can often be siloed, people from the electrical union and the workers' assembly in Richmond, as well as student organizers, as well as people working on tenant unions and tenant rights and housing justice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People who might not know each other directly, and to create a space in which we can both build relationship, rehabilitate our you know, our social fabric in that respect, and in our own city of Richmond, but also to be able to think through the fact that we got to just be blatant with ourselves, where we are suffering a lot of losses as things become increasingly intense. I don't think anyone would disagree with me that even though our movements are becoming more sophisticated, our organizing and our consciousness is evolving, we're not quite matching the stakes of the moment. And more importantly, we're not matching the needs of people as we accelerate towards crisis and the increasing intensity and rapidity of crisis. So we want to create a space that enables us to bridge and create a movement strategy that encapsulates a shared kind of blueprint, some baseline kind of shared practical goals that we're trying to reach, and that we can reach more effectively by coordinating across various movements. And as you can see on the left photo, part of what the food distribution goals we have is people are like organizing is work. And there are people who organize in nonprofit positions, but a lot of people are just doing that work, you know, unpaid. And it's work. It's hard, and it takes a toll on you, and it takes time, and you have to really invest yourself. So we want to kind of freak a work trade model, where instead of it being like you come here to work on this farm and then you get produce in exchange, people who are participating, who are organizers in their own respect, who are putting time into committing to this organizing effort, you know, that is the work in which we're exchanging food for, and trying to exchange that food as a way of not just a act of kindness, but a way of freeing up some of that. Maybe it's a little bit of cash that you won't spend at the grocery store, or maybe it's a little bit of time you won't spend needing to figure that out, you know? And Alaric has already hit that also. We're only as sharp, we're only as capable as we are healthy. And that's been a weapon used against us and against marginalized communities for a long time now. And I think that kind of gets me to the end. I guess I'll hit y'all with this concept that I think is where I've arrived as far as why I see the work of agrarian production and agriculture in general being important, which another word for politics is choices. But we don't just have the full spectrum of choices that we can conceive of available to us. If you don't have a car, you can't make a choice about whether you'll drive, take a bus, or walk somewhere. You only have the choice of either walk or take a bus. And if you live in a place where there's not a bus system, then you don't have a choice. You have to walk, you know? So the way I see it is we need to organize in order to create a wider spectrum of choices that we can then politically kind of define ourselves and what we want through the choices that we are enabled to make. Organizing is not just saying like, this is what we want, and then painting a banner about it and having a mass march that everyone is saying this is what we want, you know? Farming to me, agriculture, solidarity, economy work, sovereignty-based kind of work that's being done in the community. Like, these are all things that are changing the terrain of choices that are available to us, which is then dramatically and foundationally changing what is politically possible. And when we have a crisis, you know, even a heat wave, let alone a hurricane or a historic fire, when we have these crises, a lot of the choices that are kind of presented to us through the economy and the political system as it exists are now eliminated. So living in the era, this is my last sentence, living in the era of climate survival, a lot of that has to do with me is, for me, is anticipating that the only thing we can be sure of is that there will be more crises ahead. That we should not expect a reality, a strategy, an imagination that is not defined by these crises, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's et cetera, right? So to me, what does organizing on a day-to-day basis look like? It means creating the material and social bases, constructing and organizing the material and social bases, so that when the next crisis strikes our own specific locality, or in a pandemic strikes the entirety of the globe, we already have created the bases where we can make decisions about our own lives. Like Alaric was saying, you know, the people closest to the problems are most intelligent about the solutions, or are most enabled to understand the solutions, but they're furthest away, you know, from the tools needed. So how do we build those tools? How do we build the kind of access to them? That's a lot of the focus and orientation of our work out here in Virginia. All right, thank you.